Rishad, thank you so much for doing this. We are going to talk a bit about leadership and lifestyle, but I can't not start with the two big themes, tariffs and AI. On one hand, it's funny how the US has never tariffed India on IT and services. So on one side, it seems like you and me, IT, a real estate developer, GCCs over here are safe. On the other hand, you have AI, this revolution that's accelerating so fast, and there's an unknown. Are we at risk with this whole revolution?
So first of all, thank you for having me, Aditya. And I feel so, I didn't realize the real estate guys dress so formally, so I feel very underdressed, but I'm going to go with it. Look, as you know, as in the earlier conversations, and Nandan alluded to this, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen with tariffs and how that unfolds. And unfortunately, the unpredictability is what creates more chaos and challenge as opposed to just having certainty, whatever that certainty may be, and that certainty sticking. Because what I find, and it's interesting over the last couple of months, I was very excited about how large US enterprises were thinking about just spend broadly, and that certainly shows up in IT as well. But I find over the last couple of months, they've become a little bit more circumspect because they don't know how things are going to unfold, right? So their own CapEx cycles, their own investment thesis over the next 12 to 18 months are just taking a back step till they figure out what is going to stick and what is not going to stick. So I think that is the challenge, and unfortunately, this uncertainty doesn't help, but hopefully as we move into the second half of this year, we can see more certainty unfold with what is going to sort of stick versus not stick. So that's one. To look on the side of AI, I've been at Wipro 18 years, and this is probably the most profound technological change we've all seen for two reasons. One is just the speed at which it is moving and how pervasive it is to everything, right? I'm a huge believer that any technological change provides opportunity, especially for companies like us, which are technology services companies, because the value of the technology is in applying it to actually solve real-world problems. And so there's a huge opportunity, I think, in being able to do that. The other thing which I think Nandan also alluded to is, we serve large enterprises, and the challenge with large enterprises, unlike consumer adoption of technology, is large enterprises are messy. They're complex, right? They have disorganized data, they have multiple systems, they are still early on in their journey of modernizing, architecting their data, identifying which use cases, how do you solve it on scale, how do you make sure it's safe. So I think all of that creates huge opportunity, and so I'm very excited about the opportunity that it presents. The reality is, will it create some change? Will it create some disruption? Of course. It'll create change, of course. It'll create disruption for people. And so how do you take people along is going to be incredibly, incredibly important. And I'm of this view that the linearity of how do you reskill people and adoption of AI on scale will go very much hand in hand. And you'll have to think through constantly how do you give people comfort that they have a future or they can be made relevant in a world in which their current job is less relevant. So this whole reskilling agenda and this whole change management agenda of how do you actually give people that comfort is going to be incredibly important. But how quickly this unfolds is anybody's guess, right?
No. Yeah. Well, I agree that big companies are messy. You're a massive company. How messy is it at Wipro as you adjust with this AI? And what are you guys doing different at Wipro?
Yeah.
Not for your clients, but for yourselves.
Look, we're 235,000 people. We've grown through acquisitions. We've gone through doing things organically. We're complex. We're complex like anybody else is. And so it's very interesting you say that because the first conversation a customer wants to have, and when you're selling them things you can do for them in terms of solving problems for them on AI, they say, stop selling me all this stuff. You're a large company. You're complex and chaotic. What are you guys doing to try and sort of change things inside of your own organization? I think the one thing we're trying to do very hard is drive a very strong AI-first mindset in the company. So we've trained all 235,000 people, starting with me. Our board is now going through it, just on the fundamentals of AI. And then obviously you have people at 201, 301, 401, and experts. And it doesn't make me an expert, but it makes people like me aware of what opportunities exist to leverage the technology. So that's one very strong, from a mindset perspective, how do you make it all pervasive in the company? And then sort of how do we leverage it to solve very specific problems? So I'll give you my favorite one because I use it, and it's very simple, but I think it's very powerful. which is, we've now introduced a very simple conversational agent called Wipro Now, which not only provides you information, but you can also transact, right? So for everything from, can I apply for leave, which I do myself, I don't use my assistant, to figuring out whether root canals are covered as a part of my insurance policy, and how the hell would you figure that out without having to toggle multiple apps and multiple screens, etc. We've had 14 million queries in the last 12 months with 80% plus user favorability, right? So you are dramatically exciting and energizing problem solving for a demanding customer called the employee, right? Now, it also has the benefit, we have 1,100% shared services center inside of Wipro that serves just Wipro employees. It's come down to about 750, it'll come down to 300. So you'll save some money, but more importantly, you're creating just easy access to information, so you're driving speed and just delightful experiences. We're leveraging it, for example, our chief legal officer, we sign 400-page MSAs with our customers. Who the hell reads a 400-page MSA, right? Which delivery leader actually reads that? Which delivery leader knows what are the things you're signing up for, which have penalties, which are incredibly important to the customer? So how can you synthesize and simplify that for the leader, the delivery manager, to know what they have to solve, right? So those kinds of things, just those kinds of examples, we're going to make it all pervasive, certainly in the functions. And I find the interest of customers, especially those who are early on in their journey, is, look, let me try and figure out similar ways of implementing low-hanging fruits inside of the organization.
Interesting. Okay, so you started your career at Wipro in 2007, is that right?
That's right.
You climbed your way up the ladder. You started at the very bottom, and I think in 19 you took over as chair. My question is, how different was culture when you first joined to where it is now? Tell us a bit about the culture at Wipro, and what was the values that you brought in, and how did you change that?
Yeah. So Aditya, I think that's one thing that has not changed too much in the company, right? We've been articulating our values, which I think the first time was called Wipro Beliefs. It was then called the Wipro Promise. It's now called the Spirit of Wipro. So the first time we articulated our values very formally was in 1970. We were founded in 1945, so we had nothing formal between 45 and 1970, and 55 years ago, we formalized it. And I would say the essence of it hasn't changed dramatically. We've just made it more contemporary, more modern, to be able to be relatable to somebody who's in their 20s today versus somebody who was in their 20s in 1970, right? So the fundamentals of our values have not changed, and I think that's incredibly important. It's incredibly powerful. We're very proud of who we are. One of the things I did in 2019, 2020, and it wasn't frankly planned, it just unfolded in a way, because I was spending time just when I took over with our top 25, 30 leaders, and I was saying to them, what is our challenge? What is working? What is not working? And I found that, as large organizations become large, they become complex, right? So there's lots of siloism, people focused about them, not sharing their best people, not helping other parts of the organization, everything being about me as opposed to being about the company. So I began this journey just talking very publicly about this challenge. And my big realization, which I discovered accidentally, which sounds very simple in hindsight, for me was a big realization, was that, we articulated values, but people don't experience values. People experience your behaviors. People experience how you show up to live those values in real life, right? So most organizations say they're respectful, but if you are rude, use foul language, are abusive, don't listen to people, you're not inclusive, you're not showing respect, you're not behaving in a respectful manner, even though you claim you're respectful. So I spent a lot of time just talking about what we now call the 5 habits, which are our values in action, trying to bring these values to life every day. And I've personally done 145 sessions. I've personally spent maybe 400 hours on this. I've personally met 35,000, 40,000 of our colleagues. And I just tell stories, just stories of why I think this is important and why this is the lifeline of the company, right? Because strategies can come and go, but if your fundamental ethos and what you stand for shakes, I think that can be dangerous for an organization, especially if you're proud of what you think you stand for.
Yeah, and I love that about you. I've geeked out about Rishad. I've watched a ton of interviews leading up to this, and you bring yourself down, you bring yourself vulnerable. You even today just said you're not an expert at it. And I think you put yourselves amongst all the mid-level I guess, at Wipro to make them see equal in you? And has that been a secret in how you drive in that mid-tier? Because, we did a Gallup survey and we saw the senior management, our cultural scores very aligned with our values. We saw the very entry level, the staff level, very aligned, but there was a valley because the mid-level, wasn't really echoing that. And that's what me and our team was realizing, that we have to keep drilling it down, not just one layer, but two layers, and we have to lead by example.
Yeah. No, look, Aditya, I think this is a very dangerous perception that just because you're senior, you know more, right? You may know more, you don't always know more because you're moving more and more away from the factory floor, from where the organization actually transacts, right? So I think that's an important thing for us to keep in mind. The other thing, one of my board members said this to me, and I'll never forget it. He said to me, Rishad, leaders are not in charge of things. They're in charge of people who are in charge of things, right? So how do you keep people energized and motivated? How do you spend your time with people closest to the ground to learn what's actually happening, what's not happening? And most importantly, how do you attract people who are infinitely better than you, who know they're better than you? You know they're better than you. We all know that they're much better. They could do your job much better. And how do you keep them motivated and energized to stay in the organization, right? So that's what I spend a lot of my time on, because I don't have any of the answers. I'm trying to surround myself with smart people who have the answers, who can educate me, who can make me more aware of what I don't know. And, we just have to have the humility to be able to say, I don't know. The most dangerous thing is to pretend you know when you don't know.
Yeah. And do you see a struggle with this newer Gen Z who there's a little bit higher attrition all across, and these guys are a little bit different in the way they want to be treated? Do you see a difference in adjusting to the culture at Wipro at that generation?
No, I think from the we're all human. The fundamental ethos, the fundamental values of what an organization stands for matter. So for example, I'll share something with you which we didn't talk about much before, right? So one of the things that two-thirds of Wipro, 67% of the economic interest of Wipro is irrevocably owned by the Azim Premji Foundation, which nobody over generations can ever change that even if they wanted to, right? So we're owned by a philanthropic institution. Two-thirds of every dollar we make goes to a good cause ultimately, which matters tremendously to me. It matters tremendously to many of my colleagues. I didn't realize how much it mattered so tremendously to so many people in the organization. So I don't meet so many colleagues who join us from campus. I'll meet them in some sessions, but I meet many of senior people who join us. And it's amazing, 5 out of 10 people will say, one of the reasons I'm joining the company is because of what the company stands for. So those kinds of things, I think, stand universally, irrespective whether you're Gen Z or you're millennial or you're Gen X. Just the fundamentals of our humanness, I think, doesn't change with technology and time. Hopefully it doesn't change.
One of the things me and you have in common is we look after ourselves. And we both wear this Whoop device. We track our sleep. We watch what we eat. And we've been doing this for some time. How has that changed your leadership style and your decision-making abilities? And when did you start being so mindful about that?
Yeah, Aditya, so the journey began very chaotically, because it began initially with just starting to exercise, but not regularly. It then began with, I discovered that I had huge gut issues, so I had to change the way I ate. It then began with just eating right, and then it began with just sort of trying to sleep more purposefully. But the big aha for me is what it's actually doing is for my head. So I spend a lot of time now talking about it. Like all of us, I don't have good days. I have some days when I'm feeling blah, I'm not feeling great, my best side is not showing up. And I realized that the days when I'm very intentional about sleeping right, about exercising, about eating right, it just does wonders for my head. So I'm doing this all now for my head, and that's the only thing I'm doing it for. And I'm talking very publicly and very visibly about it, certainly within Wipro, because I just find the days I'm doing this, I'm just happier, I'm less irritable, I have more of a can-do attitude, I snap less at people. I'm just showing up.
You show up better.
And I remember we did this, me and our CEO did this last January with about 200 people in the room at Wipro. And there was a lady who stood up in the room, and I'll never forget this. She said to me, thank you for sharing that, because I'm having a crappy day. I'm not feeling so good today in my head. And just knowing that it's okay not to be okay, and there are other people not feeling okay, it just makes me feel less alone, right? So I spend a lot of my time just talking about this, but also doing it, frankly, for my head more than anything else. And
Yeah,
I
and you
feel
feel
good,
it.
so I continue doing it. So it becomes like a drug.
Yeah, no, it's addictive. It feels good to feel good. I don't know how else to say it, but it does.
Yeah.
Does it rub off on your senior management?
I don't know. I mean, people make their own choices, but I think generally it's a generation and time where people are just getting more focused on health and trying to just take care of themselves and realizing that they need to take care of themselves first to be impactful for anybody else. If you're not taking care of yourself, your best side is not showing up at work, your best side is not showing up for your family. So it's actually quite selfless, I think, to be taking care of yourself, because I just find I'm just nicer when I'm around, and it's nice to be around someone who's just nicer if they're taking care of themselves.
No, one of the things that's just sticking with me so much, and I'm glad it's early on, is time is the only currency that matters, and the quality of time matters too. So I've just been on this mission of just taking care of myself and trying to promote as well internally. Okay, I have a few fireside questions, quick fire.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Okay, you got to keep it quick. One book to recommend to everyone here.
Outlive by Peter Thiel.
Peter Thiel, I love that. Okay, unlimited money,
Sorry?
or but poor health, or great health but poor money.
Yeah, I mean, I would say good health and poor money.
Okay.
But it's an easy question for me to answer sitting here, but yeah.
Favorite thing to unwind?
Hanging out with good friends.
Favorite holiday?
Goa.
Goa.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
One word to describe your leadership style.
Empathetic.
One underrated leadership style.
Just because you don't bark doesn't mean you can't bite.
Okay, I agree with that, by the way.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think, when you have positional leverage, you have a halo effect. And you don't have to express and emphasize how pissed off you are. Best advice you've ever received?
Don't, people will tell you have big shoes to fill. Don't try and focus on filling big shoes. Try and stitch your own, because you can't fill big shoes.
Yeah. Something you wish you knew when you were 25?
It'll be okay.
It'll be okay. Okay. All right, guys.
Good.
Thank you so much. That was
Good.
fun, Rishad.
Thanks.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having me.
Thank you.
Good to see you.